Sarah Mitchell never imagined a simple no thanks to joining her neighborhood's HOA would spiral into an all-out war, complete with a massive semi-truck blocking her driveway and an entitled Karen demanding thousands in backdated fees she never agreed to pay. But as she stared at the 18-wheeler cutting off access to her award-winning photography studio, she knew this wasn't just about money. It was about power, control, and one woman's refusal to be bullied into submission. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. As the owner of Captured Moments Photography, Sarah had spent the last 5 years building her reputation as one of the city's premier portrait photographers. Her Victorian-style home in the historic Oak Grove district of Somerset served both as her residence and studio, its wraparound porch and carefully restored architecture providing the perfect backdrop for her signature vintage-inspired photoshoots. The property's location on the edge of the recently developed Willow Creek Estates made it unique, technically part of the historic district, but bordering the newer, more restrictive community. Sarah had deliberately chosen this location for its perfect blend of old-world charm and professional accessibility. The house's original features, from its ornate woodwork to its stained glass windows, added an authenticity to her work that clients traveled hours to experience. Her decision to restore rather than modernize had drawn praise from local preservation societies and features in several design magazines. The spacious garden, with its antique rose bushes and vintage iron gazebo, had become a favorite spot for engagement photos and family portraits. When Willow Creek Estates began expanding 2 years ago, their HOA had made several attempts to absorb the bordering properties, including Sarah's. She had politely but firmly declined each time, knowing that their strict regulations would severely limit her ability to operate her business. The rules they wanted to impose, from restrictions on business hours to limitations on client parking, would have effectively killed her livelihood. What made her studio unique was its flexibility. Sarah often accommodated clients early, in the morning to catch the perfect sunrise lighting, or in the evening for dramatic sunset shots. Her vintage pickup truck, which she used as a prop for rustic-themed photoshoots, sat proudly in her circular driveway, something the HOA had specifically cited as unsightly in their numerous complaints. The garden, which she had painstakingly cultivated to provide year-round shooting locations, violated several of their landscaping ordinances. They wanted uniform, manicured lawns, not the wild English cottage garden style she had created. Her authentic wooden signage, hand-carved by a local artisan, didn't meet their professional signage standards. Even the historic color scheme of her house, a deep burgundy with cream trim, fell outside their approved palette of neutral earth tones. Sarah had built her brand around being different, around preserving history while creating art. Her clients chose her precisely because her studio offered something unique in a world of cookie-cutter perfection. The irony wasn't lost on her that the very things the HOA wanted to eliminate were the elements that had earned her recognition in Somerset-style magazine as Best Boutique Photography Studio 3 years running. This morning had started like any other. Sarah had been in her garden at dawn, adjusting her camera settings to capture the morning light filtering through the rose arbor. She had a full day of sessions ahead, a newborn shoot at 9, engagement photos at noon, and a high school seniors portrait session in the afternoon. Her assistant, Emma, would be arriving soon to help set up the indoor studio for the newborn session. But as she turned to head inside, she spotted something that made her blood run cold. A massive white semi-truck, its engine idling ominously, backing into her driveway. Behind it stood Patricia Henderson, the HOA board president, her perfectly styled blonde hair and designer workout wear a stark contrast to the industrial beast of a vehicle she had apparently summoned to make her point. Sarah's grip tightened on her camera as she watched Patricia's satisfied smirk grow. This wasn't just another HOA complaint. This was a declaration of war. And while Sarah had always preferred to capture battles through her lens rather than fight them, she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she wasn't about to let anyone bully her out of the home and business she had worked so hard to build. Little did Patricia know, she had just picked a fight with someone who had nothing to lose and everything to protect. And Sarah Mitchell was about to prove that sometimes the best shots are the ones you never see coming. Sarah's first instinct was to document everything. Years of photography had taught her the power of capturing crucial moments, so she raised her camera and started taking shots of the truck, its position, and Patricia's smug expression. The early morning light cast long shadows across her blocked driveway, creating an almost surreal scene. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Sarah called out, her voice steady despite the anger building in her chest. She continued photographing as she approached, making sure to capture the truck's position relative to her property lines. Patricia Henderson strutted forward, her designer sneakers crunching on the gravel. She held a thick manila envelope in her manicured hands, wielding it like a weapon. "Oh, good. You're awake. We can handle this now, rather than later." Her voice dripped with false sweetness. "We've been trying to reach you about your outstanding HOA dues." "Outstanding dues?" Sarah lowered her camera, her confusion genuine. "I'm not part of your HOA. I've never been part of your HOA. We've been through this before, Patricia." "Actually," Patricia's smile widened as she pulled documents from her envelope. "According to these papers, your property falls within our jurisdiction. The previous owner signed an agreement back in 1998 that was never properly dissolved. You've been in violation for years, and the fees have been adding up." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. She knew this was nonsense. She'd done her due diligence when purchasing the property. Her real estate attorney had confirmed there were no HOA attachments, but Patricia's confidence was unsettling. "I have 6 clients scheduled today," Sarah said, gesturing to the truck. "You can't just block my business entrance. This is harassment." "Harassment?" Patricia laughed, the sound sharp and hollow. "This is enforcement. You owe the association $47,000 in back dues, fines and penalties, until you agree to pay or work. Out a payment plan? That truck isn't moving. We have every right to restrict access to non-compliant properties." Sarah's mind raced. Her first client would arrive in less than 2 hours, a newborn shoot that couldn't be rescheduled. The baby's parents had been planning this for weeks, coordinating with their hospital discharge just for these photos. And after that, the engaged couple who had driven 3 hours for their session. "This is ridiculous," Sarah said, pulling out her phone. "I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," Patricia shrugged, seemingly pleased with herself. "But you might want to read these first." She thrust the papers towards Sarah. "Everything we're doing is perfectly legal. Your property has been under our jurisdiction this whole time. You've just been choosing to ignore it." Sarah glanced at the documents. They looked official, with stamps and signatures, but something felt off. The dates didn't quite align with what she knew about her property's history. The previous owner had sold to her directly because they shared a vision about preserving the home's historic character. The truck driver leaned out his window, looking bored. "Lady, I just go where they tell me. I'll be here all day if I have to be." Sarah's phone buzzed, a text from Emma, her assistant. "Stuck in traffic, but should be there in 15. Everything okay? Saw a weird truck pulling up on the security camera." The security cameras. Sarah had installed them last year after a series of vandalism incidents in the historic district. They would have captured the entire scene, including Patricia's arrival and the truck's entrance onto her property. She quickly texted back, "Start recording and saving all footage. We might need it." Patricia was still talking, rattling off various violations and fines, each more absurd than the last. Apparently, Sarah's vintage pickup truck was a commercial, a vehicle being stored improperly. Her garden violated height restrictions. Even her historic house color was listed as a violation, despite predating the HOA by decades. "You have exactly 1 hour to start processing payment," Patricia declared, checking her designer watch. "After that, we'll have to take additional measures." "Additional measures?" Sarah's voice was ice. "You're already illegally blocking my business." "Oh, honey," Patricia's smile turned predatory. "You haven't seen anything yet. 1 hour, clock's ticking." As Patricia turned to leave, her tennis skirt swishing, Sarah noticed something that made her pause. The documents in her hand had a law. Firm's letterhead she recognized. Harrison and Wells. Her best friend from college worked there as a paralegal. Maybe it was time to call in a favor and find out if these papers were as official as they appeared. Sarah watched Patricia climb into her luxury SUV and drive away, leaving the truck idling in the driveway. The driver had settled in with a newspaper, clearly prepared for a long wait. The morning sun was climbing higher, and Sarah could feel time slipping away. She had exactly 53 minutes until her first client was supposed to arrive. Taking a deep breath, she did what she did best. She documented everything. Every angle of the truck, every detail of the papers. Patricia had left, even the tire marks on her gravel driveway. Something about this felt calculated, planned, and Sarah had learned long ago that the best defense was a thorough record of events. She had built her business by capturing perfect moments. Now she was capturing evidence, and Patricia Henderson was about to learn that she had picked the wrong photographer to intimidate. Sarah immediately dialed the police non-emergency line, maintaining her professional composure despite her rising anxiety. As she waited, she continued documenting everything, photographing the semi's license plate, the driver's commercial registration number visible on the door, and the growing line of dark fluid that appeared to be leaking from the truck onto her. "Carefully maintained gravel driveway. Somerset Police Department, how can I assist you?" The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional. "Yes, I need to report a commercial vehicle illegally blocking access to my business," Sarah explained, watching as her security cameras continued recording the scene. "I have clients scheduled to arrive soon, and a woman claiming to represent an HOA I'm not part of has orchestrated this blockade. Can you verify your address?" After Sarah provided the details, the dispatcher continued, "And is this vehicle completely preventing access to your property?" "Completely," Sarah confirmed, basing near her garden. "It's a full-size semi positioned across my entire driveway. I have a newborn photography session scheduled in less than 2 hours. The parents are bringing their baby directly from the hospital. They can't reschedule this." The dispatcher took down additional details, and Sarah felt a glimmer of hope when she was assured officers would be dispatched to assess the situation. While waiting, she called her friend Jessica at Harrison and Wells law firm. "Jess, I need a huge favor," Sarah said, still keeping an eye on the truck driver who had now propped his feet up on the dashboard. "I've got some legal documents here, with your firm's letterhead. Any chance you could verify if they're legitimate?" "Of course," Jessica replied, concern evident in her voice. "What's going on?" "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. As Sarah explained the situation, she noticed a patrol car pulling up to her property. 2 officers stepped out, one older with graying hair and a younger officer who looked fresh out of the academy. The senior officer approached her first, while his partner went to speak with the truck driver. "Ms. Mitchell?" the older officer asked, introducing himself as Sergeant Reynolds. "Can you explain what's happening here?" Sarah showed him the photos she'd taken and explained the situation, including Patricia's threats and the disputed HOA jurisdiction. She handed over the documents Patricia had left, pointing out the inconsistencies she'd noticed in the dates. "Have you had any previous issues with this HOA?" Sergeant Reynolds asked, flipping through the papers. "Multiple attempts to force me to join, complaints about my business operations, but nothing this aggressive," Sarah replied, watching as the younger officer continued talking with the truck driver. "I've documented everything. I can show you the security footage of how this all unfolded this morning." The younger officer jogged back over. "Sarge, the driver says he has proper documentation for a civil enforcement action. Says he's contracted through something called Community Compliance Services." Sergeant Reynolds sighed, and Sarah's heart sank at his expression. "Ms. Mitchell, unfortunately, this appears to be a civil matter. If they have paperwork claiming authority to restrict access, even if those claims are disputed, we can't force them to move the vehicle without a court order." "But this is my property," Sarah protested, gesturing to her house. "I have proof. I'm not part of their HOA. I have clients coming. This is affecting my business." "I understand your frustration," Sergeant Reynolds said, his tone sympathetic but firm. "But if there's a legitimate dispute over jurisdiction, this needs to be handled through civil courts. I'd strongly advise consulting with an attorney." "So you're saying they can just block access to my property with no consequences?" Sarah asked, disbelief evident in her voice. "Not indefinitely," the younger officer offered. "But until a judge rules on the jurisdiction issue, our hands are tied. You could try filing for an emergency injunction." Sarah's phone buzzed. Emma had arrived, but couldn't get past the truck. Another text followed immediately. Her 9 a.m. clients were already on their way from the hospital. "Look," Sergeant Reynolds said, lowering his voice, "off the record, these situations can get messy. HOAs sometimes push boundaries to see what they can get away with. Document everything, get legal representation, and be careful. These disputes have a way of escalating." As if on cue, Sarah's phone rang, Patricia Henderson's number flashing on the screen. She declined the call, watching as the officers returned to their patrol car. They hadn't even finished pulling away when another text from Patricia arrived. "Clock's still ticking. 43 minutes left. Ready to discuss payment?" Sarah felt her professional calm starting to crack. She had built her business on reliability and excellence. The thought of having to cancel on clients, especially the newborn session, was unthinkable. But as she watched the truck driver settle in more comfortably, pulling out a lunch cooler, she realized she needed to think strategically. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Jessica from the law firm. "Sarah, these documents, something's not right. The letterhead is old, retired 3 years ago. And the partner's signature? He's been retired for 5 years. You need to keep copies of everything they're giving you. This looks like fraud." A plan started forming in Sarah's mind. If the police wouldn't help and the documents were fraudulent, maybe it was time to fight fire with fire. She quickly texted Emma, "Find us the number for Peterson's Towing, the one that handles the impound lot on 5th Street. Tell them it's an emergency rate situation." The truck driver had no idea that Sarah had photographed weddings at the owner of Peterson's Towing's daughter's wedding last spring, or that she had done their family portraits for the past 3 years. Sometimes the best advantage was the one your opponent never saw coming. She glanced at her watch, 38 minutes until her first clients arrived. Time to show Patricia Henderson that she wasn't the only one who knew how to play hardball. Sarah's fingers trembled slightly as she dialed Peterson's Towing, but her voice remained steady. "Mike, it's Sarah Mitchell. I've got a situation at my studio and I need your help." She quickly explained the circumstances, her eyes never leaving the truck, still blocking her driveway. "A semi?" Mike's gruff voice held a note of concern. "That's not our usual job, Sarah. We'd need the heavy-duty rig, and even then..." He paused. "You sure about this? These HOA types can get nasty. Mike, they're using fraudulent documents. I have clients coming, including the Thompsons with their newborn. You remember shooting their wedding last spring?" Sarah watched as Emma parked on the street, unable to access the studio's parking area. I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate. There was a long pause. Give me 20 minutes. We'll bring the big rig. But Sarah, this isn't going to be cheap. Whatever it costs, Sarah replied firmly. I'll even throw in a free family photo session for Christmas cards. After hanging up, Sarah approached the truck driver again. Last chance to move your vehicle voluntarily. I've got a tow truck on the way. The driver laughed, not even bothering to look up from his newspaper. Lady, you can't tow a commercial vehicle without proper authorization. Your HOA hired us for enforcement. They're not my HOA, Sarah stated calmly, pulling out her camera, and I'm documenting that I warned you. She photographed the growing oil stain beneath his truck, making sure to capture how it was spreading across her property. That leak looks expensive. The driver finally glanced down, his expression changing slightly. That's nothing. Normal seepage. Really? Sarah raised an eyebrow. I'm sure the Environmental Protection Agency would love to hear about normal seepage contaminating the groundwater in a historic district. I wonder what other violations they might find if they inspect your truck. That got his attention. The driver sat up straighter, finally setting aside his newspaper. Look, I'm just doing my job. The lady in charge said to stay put until you pay up, and I'm just doing mine, Sarah replied, showing him her phone screen with the timer counting down. You've got 15 minutes before the tow truck arrives. Might want to use that time to call your boss and explain why you let your truck leak hazardous materials onto private property. As if on cue, the distinct rumble of Peterson's heavy-duty tow truck could be heard approaching. The massive vehicle turned the corner, its yellow warning lights flashing. Mike had brought not one, but two trucks. The huge heavy-duty rig and a standard tow truck behind it. The semi-driver's confident demeanor cracked. He scrambled for his phone, punching in numbers with shaking fingers. Sarah could hear him trying to reach Patricia, his voice growing increasingly panicked as it went to voicemail repeatedly. Mike jumped down from his truck, his weathered face breaking into a grin. Nice morning for a tow, isn't it? He walked around the semi, assessing the situation professionally. Oh, look, we've got ourselves an environmental hazard here too. He photographed the leak with his own camera. That's gonna cost extra to clean up properly. The semi-driver was now standing outside his cab, alternating between trying to call Patricia and arguing with Mike about the legality of the tow. You can't do this! We have authorization! Funny thing about that, Mike replied, already setting up his equipment. This is private property, and the property owner has requested removal of an unauthorized vehicle that's leaking hazardous materials. Pretty straightforward from where I'm standing. Emma, who had been quietly documenting everything on her tablet, suddenly called out, Sarah, Mrs. Thompson just texted. They're 10 minutes away with the baby. The semi-driver made one last attempt to reach Patricia, then finally slumped in defeat. Fine, I'll move it. Just give me a minute to get it started. Meter's already running, Mike called out cheerfully. Environmental cleanup fee, too, unless you'd prefer we complete the tow. The driver practically jumped into his cab. The engine roared to life, and with far more agility than seemed possible for such a large vehicle, he maneuvered it off Sarah's property. As he pulled away, Sarah could see him still trying to call Patricia. Mike walked over to Sarah, handing her a business card. Send me the photos of that oil leak. If they give you any more trouble, my cousin works for the EPA. Might be interesting to have the truck's maintenance records checked. Sarah hugged him impulsively. Mike, you're a lifesaver. Send me the bill, and don't forget to schedule that family photo session. As Mike's trucks pulled away, Emma was already spreading absorbent material on the oil stain and setting up signs to direct the Thompsons to the temporary parking area. They had just enough time to get the studio ready for the newborn session. Sarah allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. Round one had gone to her, but she knew Patricia Henderson wouldn't take this defeat lying down. Still, she had won herself some breathing room and sent a clear message. She wasn't going to be bullied. Her phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "You've just made a very big mistake. Hope you've got good insurance." Sarah photographed the message, adding it to her growing file of evidence. She had a feeling she was going to need it, but right now she had a newborn session to prepare for, and her clients deserved her full attention and professionalism. Whatever Patricia was planning would have to wait. Sarah had won this battle, but she knew the war was far from over. The newborn session went perfectly, despite the morning's chaos. Sarah had just finished backing up the images when Emma rushed into the studio, her face pale. "Sarah, you need to see this." Following Emma outside, Sarah froze. Where the semi-truck had been parked, a mountain of construction debris now blocked her driveway. Broken concrete, twisted metal, splintered wood, and what looked suspiciously like old bathroom fixtures. The pile stretched nearly 6 feet high and completely blocked access to her property. "It happened during the Thompson session," Emma explained, pulling up security footage on her tablet. 2 unmarked dump trucks. They were fast, in and out in less than 10 minutes. Sarah watched the footage, her photographer's eye noting details. The trucks had no visible company names or license plates. The workers wore unmarked coveralls and kept their faces turned away from the cameras. This was planned, professional. "The engagement shoot clients will be here in an hour," Emma said quietly. "What do you want me to tell them?" Before Sarah could answer, an expensive black SUV pulled up. Patricia Henderson stepped out, wearing a different designer outfit than earlier, but sporting the same smug smile. She picked her way carefully around, the debris in her high heels, holding up her phone to take photos. "Tsk, tsk," Patricia called out. "Looks like someone's having construction waste disposal issues. You know, the HOA has preferred contractors who handle this sort of thing. For members in good standing, of course." "You did this," Sarah stated flatly, already photographing the debris from multiple angles. "This is illegal dumping." "Really?" Patricia's smile widened. "Prove it. Our cameras," she gestured to the Willow Creek Estates security cameras mounted on nearby poles, "show 2 municipal waste trucks. Probably a mix-up in scheduling. These things happen." Sarah noticed something partially buried in the debris, fragments of vintage wood that looked eerily familiar. Moving closer, her heart sank. Mixed in with the construction waste were pieces of her antique photography props. The Victorian settee she used for newborn photos, the hand-carved frame she featured in wedding shots, even parts of her beloved garden arch. "You broke into my studio?" Sarah's voice was dangerously quiet. "Breaking in?" "Oh no, we would never do that," Patricia replied, examining her manicure. "But I did hear that some local teenagers were causing trouble last night." "Such a shame. If you were part of our association, you'd have access to our security patrol services." Emma touched Sarah's arm, showing her more security footage. At 3 a.m., figures in dark clothing had entered the prop storage area behind the studio. The footage was grainy, but their movements were too coordinated for random vandals. "The police will be interested in this," Sarah said, already pulling out her phone. "The police?" Patricia laughed. "Honey, they already told you this morning. It's a civil matter. And good luck proving those props were worth anything. I mean, really, who uses outdated furniture for modern photography?" Sarah felt her hands shake with rage, but years of keeping steady for precise shots helped her maintain control. Those pieces were antiques, irreplaceable. "Well, if they were so valuable, you should have protected them better," Patricia shrugged. "Of course, our members get excellent insurance rates through the association. Something to think about." A car turned down the street. Sarah's engagement shoot clients. Patricia's smile turned predatory. "Oh dear, looks like you'll have to cancel. Such a shame. Word gets around about unreliable photographers, you know." But Sarah was already moving. "Emma, Text them to meet us at Riverside Park. Tell them we're doing a location shoot. No extra charge." She turned to Patricia. "You can dump all the garbage you want. I don't need my driveway to run my business." "For now," Patricia replied sweetly. "But I wonder, how long can you keep shooting at alternate locations, especially when those locations start having their own issues?" "Is that a threat?" "Yours not, just an observation. Things happen, permits get revoked, parks close for maintenance, weather turns bad." Patricia started walking back to her SUV. "But HOA members get access to our lovely community centre, perfect for indoor shoots. The application fee is quite reasonable, only about what you charge for 2 or 3 sessions." After Patricia drove away, Sarah and Emma quickly loaded essential equipment into Emma's car, since the studio vehicles were blocked in. As they worked, Sarah noticed something else in the debris: fresh roses, crushed and broken. Her garden. They had vandalized her garden too. "Sarah," Emma's voice was worried. "What are we going to do?" Sarah took a deep breath, remembering something her photography mentor had taught her. Sometimes the best shots come from the worst situations. You just have to change your perspective. "First, we're going to rock this engagement session," she said firmly. "Then we're going to document every single piece of this debris, and then," she pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts. "Remember my client from last month, the environmental lawyer?" Emma nodded slowly, a small smile forming. "Time to call in some favors. Patricia wants to play dirty. Fine. But she's about to learn that I know how to capture a lot more than just pretty pictures." Her phone buzzed with another text from Patricia. "TikTok, dues are going up every day. Hope you're good at shooting in public parks while they're still available to you." Sarah took a photo of the message, adding it to her evidence folder. The engagement shoot clients were waiting. She had to focus on them now, but her mind was already forming a plan. Patricia thought she could break her by destroying her props and blocking her business. She was about to discover that Sarah Mitchell was a lot like her camera, best under pressure, focused when it mattered most, and capable of exposing things people desperately wanted to keep hidden. The engagement shoot at Riverside Park went beautifully, with the golden afternoon light more than making up for the lost studio props. But as Sarah drove back to her property, her mind was already racing through next steps. She couldn't afford to be purely reactive anymore. It was time to get ahead of Patricia's game. "Emma, I need you to stop by the hardware store," Sarah said as they unloaded equipment. "Get every security camera they have in stock, motion sensors too, and see if they have any of those trail cams hunters use." While Emma headed to the store, Sarah called her environmental lawyer client, Diana Chen. "The debris isn't just construction waste," Sarah explained, sending photos through her secure client portal. "There's evidence of automotive fluids, old paint cans, what looks like asbestos, tiles, and they've destroyed several protected heritage rose varieties from my garden." "Send me everything you have," Diana replied, her tone shifting from friendly to professional. "Times, dates, security footage, especially anything showing the dump trucks. If they transported hazardous materials without proper permits, that's federal territory." Sarah worked methodically, organizing her evidence into categories: property damage, harassment, environmental violations, fraudulent documents. She created multiple backups, storing them both locally and in secure cloud storage. Years of protecting precious wedding photos had taught her the value of redundancy. When Emma returned with the security equipment, they began creating an interlocking web of surveillance. Cameras with overlapping fields of view, motion sensors, covering every approach, trail cams hidden in trees and bushes. Sarah even set up a dedicated system to monitor the remaining portions of her garden. "They won't be able to sneeze on this property without us recording it," Emma said, adjusting the final camera. "Good," Sarah replied, reviewing the coverage. On her tablet. But we need more. Pull up the drone. Sarah had invested in a professional drone for aerial wedding shots, but now it served a different purpose. They launched it, capturing detailed overhead footage of the debris pile, the property damage, and, importantly, how the mess extended beyond her property line. Look, Sarah pointed to the tablet screen. They've actually dumped partially on city property. That's a municipal easement. She immediately called the city planning office, reporting the encroachment. It might not get the debris removed immediately, but it created an official record. Every document, every report, every piece of evidence needed to be bulletproof. Next, she contacted her insurance company, meticulously documenting the destroyed props and garden damage. The adjuster sounded skeptical until Sarah provided her extensive inventory records, complete with photographs, purchase receipts, and appraisal values for the antiques. "I'm a photographer," she reminded him. "I document everything." As evening approached, Sarah noticed something concerning on the security feeds. Cars were driving by her property slowly, their occupants taking photos. Some wore Willow Creek Estates parking stickers. "They're documenting too," Emma observed, "probably trying to find code violations." "Let them," Sarah replied, setting up additional lights to ensure clear nighttime surveillance. "But we need to protect my client's privacy. Order some of those gradient filters for the studio windows. And get privacy screens for the outdoor shooting areas." She paused, thinking. "And call Marcus at the rental company, see if he can deliver some of those portable privacy walls they use for outdoor events. We'll create a screened path from the street to the studio entrance." While Emma made calls, Sarah reviewed her client's schedule for the next week. She couldn't keep shooting at alternate locations forever. Some sessions required specific studio equipment. She needed a more permanent solution. Her phone buzzed with a text from Diana. "Found something interesting. Those dump trucks, they're registered to a shell company. Guess who's on the board of directors? Your friend Patricia and 3 other HOA board members. Keep documenting everything. We're building a RICO case." Sarah smiled grimly. She pulled up property records for Willow Creek Estates, studying the layout. Their community centre, the one Patricia had mentioned, sat right on the border of her property. An idea began forming. "Emma," she called out, "remember that old easement dispute from last year when they tried to claim my garden path crossed? Their property line? Yeah, but the survey proved them wrong. Your property actually extends 3 feet past where they thought the line was." "Exactly. And what's sitting partly on those 3 feet? Emma's eyes widened. "The corner of their precious community centre. Get me the survey documents, all of them, and call that structural engineer client of ours, the one whose daughter's wedding we shot last month. I want to know exactly how much of their building is on my property." As night fell, Sarah and Emma did one final check of their security setup. Camera feeds displayed clearly on monitors they'd set up in the studio office. Motion sensors were armed, the drone was charged, and ready for rapid deployment. "They're going to try something tonight," Emma said quietly. "You know that, right?" Sarah nodded, checking the new automatic lights they'd installed. "Probably, but this time we'll be ready." Her phone buzzed again, another text from Patricia. "Having trouble with your gardens? Our landscaping committee would be happy to help. Once you pay those dues." Sarah didn't bother responding. Instead, she checked her cameras one last time and settled in for what promised to be a long night. Patricia thought she was just dealing with a photographer who took pretty pictures. Time to show her just how revealing a well-documented exposure could be. The first rays of sunrise revealed no new damage, but Sarah's relief was short-lived. At precisely 8 a.m., a sleek black Mercedes purred up her street, stopping just short of the debris pile. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a tall, distinguished-looking man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit. "Oh, well, this is certainly an eyesore," he called out, adjusting his gold cufflinks as he picked his way around the debris. "Ms. Mitchell, I presume." Sarah had been reviewing security footage, but stepped outside to meet him, camera in hand. "And you are Alexander Wright?" He smiled, displaying perfect white teeth that didn't reach his cold grey eyes. "I'm the legal counsel for Willow Creek Estates Community Association." He extended a manicured hand, which Sarah deliberately didn't take, keeping her camera ready instead. "Interesting timing, Mr. Wright," she replied, photographing his vehicle's license plate. "I was just about to call my own attorney about the illegal dumping and vandalism." Wright's smile didn't waver. "Yes, unfortunate business that. Patricia mentioned there had been some miscommunication. I'm here to help clear things up." He reached into his leather briefcase, extracting a thick folder. "Perhaps we could discuss this somewhere more comfortable. Your studio, maybe." "We can talk right here," Sarah said firmly, nodding to Emma, who had positioned herself to record the entire interaction on her tablet. "As you wish." Wright's tone remained pleasant, but his eyes hardened. "Ms. Mitchell, I've reviewed your property's history extensively. Did you know that in 1997 your parcel was actually part of the original Willow Creek development plan?" "That plan was rejected by the city council," Sarah countered. "It's in the public records." "Ah, but the preliminary agreements were never formally dissolved," Wright continued, pulling out several documents. "Your property exists in something of a legal grey area. We're prepared to be quite generous in resolving this situation." Sarah studied him carefully. Unlike Patricia's obvious aggression, Wright exuded calm authority. He was far more dangerous. "Generous how?" she asked, maintaining her professional demeanor. "The association is willing to waive all past dues and penalties," Wright said smoothly. "In exchange, you'll sign a retroactive membership agreement and comply with current community standards. We'll even provide a grant for approved property improvements." Sarah noticed his careful word choice. "Approved improvements?" "Nothing drastic," Wright assured her, though his smile took on a predatory edge. "Modernizing the exterior to match the community aesthetic, relocating your business to a more appropriate location, simple changes to maintain property values." "You mean destroy my historic home's character and shut down my studio?" Sarah translated. "Not interested." Wright's pleasant demeanor cracked slightly. "Ms. Mitchell, you're an intelligent businesswoman. Surely you understand your position here. The debris removal alone will cost thousands. Your insurance may prove reluctant to cover vandalism without proper security measures. Measures our association could provide." "Are you threatening me, Mr. Wright?" "Not at all," he replied smoothly. "I'm merely pointing out the practical considerations. Running a business requires stability, the right connections. Willow Creek Estates has considerable influence in this community." As if on cue, Sarah's phone buzzed. It was her afternoon client canceling their session, citing concerns about the location. Wright noticed her expression. "Ah, losing bookings. Already? Word travels fast. But our community center is always available to association members in good standing. We have quite a lovely event space." Sarah felt a chill despite the morning warmth. This wasn't just about property rights anymore. They were attacking her livelihood, her reputation. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice steady. "I have documentation of everything. The fraudulent papers, the illegal dumping, the vandalism, your association's connection to all of it." "Documentation?" Wright laughed softly. "My dear, do you really think local authorities will side with one photographer against an association representing hundreds of wealthy homeowners? We fund half the city's development projects." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Patricia can be overzealous, I admit, but I'm offering you a clean slate, one signature, and all this unpleasantness disappears. Fight us. And well," he gestured to the debris pile, "this is just the Beginning, "Get off my property," Sarah replied, raising her camera. "Any further communication can go through my lawyer." Wright shrugged, tucking his folder away. "As you wish. But remember, I tried to be reasonable. What happens next is on you." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Ms. Mitchell, I'd check your online reviews if I were you. It's remarkable how quickly a business's reputation can change." Sarah watched him drive away, her mind racing. She immediately pulled up her business profiles on various platforms. Already, there were new one-star reviews appearing. Complaints about cancelled sessions, accusations of unprofessionalism, claims of property damage. "They're trying to destroy your business," Emma said quietly. "No," Sarah replied, her voice hard. "They're trying to destroy everything I've built. But they just made a crucial mistake." "What's that?" Sarah held up her camera, displaying the photos she'd taken during Wright's visit. In the background of one shot, partially visible through his Mercedes window, was Patricia Henderson, watching the entire exchange. "They showed their hand," Sarah smiled grimly. "Now we know exactly who we're dealing with." The war had entered a new phase, and Alexander Wright had just confirmed what Sarah suspected. This went far beyond a simple property dispute. But he'd underestimated one thing. Photographers knew all about exposure, and Sarah was about to bring everything into sharp focus. After Wright's visit, Sarah spent hours combing through every document she could find related to Willow Creek Estates. Something about Wright's confidence bothered her. He'd mentioned the 1997 development plan like it was significant. While Emma handled calls from worried clients, Sarah dug deeper. "Emma, look at this," Sarah called out, spreading old zoning maps across her editing desk. In '97, this whole area was slated for commercial development. The Historical Society blocked it by getting my house and the surrounding properties classified as historic landmarks. Emma leaned in, studying the maps. But Willow Creek still got built. "Only partially," Sarah pointed out. "The original plan was 3 times bigger. They had to scale back because of the historic district." She pulled up current satellite images on her computer. "Now look at what they're building on the north side." Emma's eyes widened. "A shopping centre? And luxury." "Condos," Sarah nodded. "Right up to the edge of their current boundary. But to connect it all, they'd need your property," Emma finished, "and the other historic homes." Sarah started connecting dots. The aggressive recruitment of homeowners into the HOA, the sudden increase in code violations, the pressure on businesses operating from historic properties. It wasn't just about dues or property values. Her phone buzzed. A text from Diana, her environmental lawyer. "Found something big. Can you meet?" "Not over the phone." An hour later, Sarah sat in Diana's office, staring at documents spread across the conference table. "It's called the Willow Creek Renewal Project," Diana explained, pointing to development plans. "Phase 1 was the original estates. Phase 2 is the current north side expansion, but Phase 3..." She revealed architectural renderings. "They're planning to revitalize the entire historic district." The renderings showed modern buildings, high-end retail spaces, and luxury apartments, all exactly where the historic homes currently stood. Sarah's property was marked as a future parking structure. "How did you get these?" "Remember those dump trucks?" Diana smiled. "Their shell company led me down a rabbit hole. Willow Creek Estates isn't just an HOA, it's a front for Vale Development Corporation. They've been buying up properties through various subsidiaries using the HOA as cover." Sarah felt sick. "And Alexander Wright?" "Vale's chief counsel," Diana confirmed. "He specializes in community redevelopment projects. Usually involves pushing out long-time residents through various pressure tactics, like fraudulent HOA claims and mysterious property damage." "Exactly. They've done this before in other cities. create an HOA, use it to pressure holdouts, then once they control enough properties, they push through rezoning requests. Historic. Designations get overturned. Neighborhoods get renewed. Sarah studied the plans more closely. These renderings are dated 3 months ago. They're already selling units? Pre-selling to investors. Diana nodded. That's why they're getting aggressive. They have commitments, deadlines. Your property is one of the last holdouts. Without it, their whole connection between phases 2 and 3 falls apart. Everything clicked into place. Patricia's escalating tactics, Wright's threats about local influence, the sudden flood of negative reviews. What about the other historic homeowners? Sarah asked. Most have already sold or joined the HOA, Diana sighed. The Thompson house on Oak Street just listed last week. The Martinez family's bakery closed after repeated health code violations. It's systematic. Sarah's phone buzzed with another review notification. Someone claiming her studio's equipment damaged their designer dress. Another booking cancelled. They're trying to bankrupt me, she realized. Force a distress sale. It's their standard playbook, Diana confirmed. But, she smiled suddenly, they usually don't leave such a clear paper trail. These development plans? They were never filed with the city. They're selling properties they don't have approval to build. Sarah sat up straighter. Securities fraud? Among other things, Diana nodded. The environmental violations from the dumping are serious, but this is federal territory. But we need more evidence, internal documents, proof of the connection between Vale and the HOA. Sarah thought about Wright's visit, his confidence, his threats about local influence. They must have someone inside the city government, the sudden inspections, the selective enforcement. Probably multiple someones, Diana agreed. These projects usually require cooperative officials. The question is, how do we prove it? Sarah pulled out her phone, showing Diana the photos from Wright's visit. See that laptop in his car? The screen was visible in some shots. I can enhance the image. Diana leaned forward. Is that a development proposal email? Sarah confirmed. From our city planning director's personal email address. To Vale. Development. Can you get me better copies of these? Sarah smiled. I'm a professional photographer. I can get you images clear enough to read account numbers off that laptop screen. For the first time since this started, Sarah felt real hope. Vale Development had power, money, and influence. But they'd never gone up against someone who made her living capturing and preserving crucial moments. Her phone buzzed again. Another threat from Patricia. Ready to be reasonable yet? These reviews seem to be really hurting business. Sarah took a deep breath. Diana, how long to build a case? With what you've given me. A few weeks to get the feds involved. Maybe sooner. They'll escalate before then, Sarah warned. Diana's expression hardened. Then we'll need to be ready. Document everything. And Sarah, be careful. When people like this feel cornered, I know. Sarah nodded, gathering the documents. But they picked the wrong person to threaten. I don't just take pictures. I preserve truth. And it's time to develop the negatives they thought they'd buried. Late that evening, as Sarah was reviewing the enhanced photos from Wright's laptop, her security system pinged. An elderly man was slowly making his way up her walk, carefully avoiding the debris pile. He wore khakis and a polo shirt that had seen better days and carried a weathered leather briefcase. "Miss Mitchell," he called out softly. "I'm Robert Grayson. I used to work for the city planning office. We need to talk." Sarah checked her cameras, making sure he was alone. "Kind of late for a social call, Mr. Grayson." "Trust me," he replied, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "This had to wait until after hours. What I'm about to show you, some people would prefer it stay buried." After careful consideration, Sarah let him in. Emma positioned herself near the door, phone ready to call for help if needed. But something about Grayson's nervous energy spoke of urgency rather than threat. "I retired from the planning office 3 years ago," he began, opening his briefcase. "But I kept copies of certain documents. Insurance, you might say." He spread out a series of maps and papers across her desk. "These are the original surveys of this area, dating back to 1995. Sarah leaned in, immediately noting differences from the current plans. "The creek—" "Exactly," Grayson nodded. "Willow Creek, the actual creek, used to run right through what's now their main subdivision. Protected waterway, critical for local drainage. Supposedly, they redirected it during development. Supposedly? They buried it." Grayson's voice hardened. "Ran it through underground culverts. Technically legal, but the environmental impact. Study was, let's say, creative with the facts. I tried to raise concerns, but suddenly found myself shuffled to a different department." He pulled out more documents: geological surveys, water table studies, environmental impact reports. "Your property sits at a crucial junction. The original creek bed runs right under your garden. Those heritage roses you maintain, they're thriving because of the natural water flow." Sarah thought about the recent drainage issues in Willow Creek Estates, how some homeowners complained about wet basements and shifting foundations. They built on unstable ground. "Worse," Grayson replied. "They're still building. That new shopping center, it's going right over the main water channel. They've managed to keep it quiet, but there's already structural issues with some of their newer homes. The whole area is slowly subsiding." He showed her recent geological surveys. These were supposed to be public record, but somehow they never got filed. "A friend in the office slipped me copies before they disappeared. Why are you showing me this now?" Grayson sighed heavily. "Because yesterday, Vale Development submitted preliminary plans for ground stabilization work. They're claiming it's routine maintenance, but look at the scope. The plans showed extensive excavation work, all centered around Sarah's property and the surrounding historic homes. They're not just after my land for development," she realized. "They need it to fix their water problem. Without controlling that junction point, their whole project is at risk," Grayson confirmed. "The original creek bed is reasserting itself. Nature always wins in the end. But if this gets out, their property values would collapse," Emma interjected. "All those luxury homes and pre-sold condos." "Exactly," Grayson nodded. "They're not just being aggressive, Ms. Mitchell. They're desperate. That's why I had to warn you. When Vale Development gets desperate, accidents tend to happen." Sarah thought about the escalating vandalism, the threats. "You've seen this before. Remember the old Wilson estate? Beautiful Victorian mansion used to stand where their clubhouse is now. Tragic fire, electrical issues, they said. Never mind that the wiring had just been inspected, or the Jensen property, condemned after structural issues, appeared overnight. Amazing how quickly Vale's crews were ready to demolish it." He pulled out one final document, a faded photograph showing a group of men in suits standing in front of a construction site. Sarah recognized a younger Alexander Wright. Beside him stood their current mayor. "This goes higher than just the HOA," Grayson said quietly. "Vale Development has spent years building connections, placing people in key positions. They don't just buy properties, they buy influence." "Why help me?" Sarah asked. "You're taking a risk." Grayson's eyes grew distant. "My grandfather built some of these historic homes. Real craftsmanship, meant to last generations. Watching them get destroyed for quick profit, I should have spoken up sooner. Maybe if I had—" A car drove slowly past the house, its headlights sweeping across the windows. Grayson stiffened. "I should go. Be careful who you trust, Ms. Mitchell, and watch your property at night. Vale doesn't just bury creeks." After he left, Sarah and Emma spent hours scanning and digitizing every document he'd brought. The originals went into Sarah's bank safety deposit box the next morning. "Think he's right?" Emma asked. "About accidents." Sarah reviewed her security feeds, adding extra cameras to cover blind spots. They're not going to risk anything obvious now, not with Diana building a case, but we need to speed things up. Her phone buzzed, an email from the city planning office. Her property had been flagged for an emergency structural inspection. Reason cited: potential soil subsidence. Right on cue, Sarah muttered. They're making their move. She called Diana, quickly explaining what Grayson had revealed. Oh, how much of this can we prove? The geological surveys alone are dynamite, Diana replied. But we need to move fast. Once they start their ground stabilization work, they'll destroy the evidence, Sarah finished. Time to change the game plan. She hung up and started packing her camera gear. Vale Development had spent years burying their secrets. But Sarah was about to bring everything to the surface, one careful exposure at a time. Early the next morning, Sarah noticed movement across the street. Margaret Chen, owner of the small bakery that had operated there for 30 years, was putting up going out of business signs. Like Sarah's studio, the bakery was housed in a historic building, and Margaret had recently been fighting her own battles with mysterious health code violations. "Emma, grab my portfolio from 2019, Sarah called out. She dug through the photos until she found what she was looking for: shots from the bakery's 30th anniversary celebration. The images showed a packed store, happy customers, and most importantly, a spotless kitchen that had just passed inspection with flying colors. Crossing the street, Sarah found Margaret alone in the empty bakery, surrounded by half-packed boxes. The normally cheerful woman looked defeated. "Fourth inspection in 2 months, Margaret said before Sarah could speak. "Each time they find something new. Last week they claimed my century-old brick oven, the one that passed every inspection for 30 years, suddenly doesn't meet code." Sarah laid out the photographs on a nearby counter. "Remember these? You still have the inspection reports from back then?" "Of course, I keep everything." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because you're not the only one they're targeting." Sarah quickly explained about Vale Development, the buried creek, and the systematic pressure on historic property owners. With each detail, Margaret's expression shifted from defeat to anger. "The flooding in my basement," she said slowly. "It started right after they built that new section of homes. They said it was just poor maintenance on my part." "It's the diverted water flow," Sarah confirmed, "and I bet they offered to help if you joined their association." Margaret nodded grimly. "Said they had preferred contractors who could fix it, for members only, of course." "What if we fight back?" Sarah proposed. "Not individually, together." Over the next few hours they made calls. The Martinez family, whose restaurant had closed after similar harassment. The Hendersons, who were fighting pressure to sell their Victorian bed and breakfast. One by one, owners of historic properties came to Margaret's bakery, each bringing their own stories of intimidation and suspicious problems. By noon, the empty bakery had become an impromptu war room. Diana joined them, bringing copies of the geological surveys and development plans. Robert Grayson's documents were shared, copies made, evidence compiled. "They're counting on picking us off one by one," Sarah explained to the group, "making each of us feel isolated, but together we can prove a pattern. My health code violations started the week after I refused their buyout offer," Margaret revealed, spreading out her documentation. "Each inspector was from a different department, but look at the handwriting on these forms." "Same person," the Martinez's daughter Elena pointed out. She'd worked in document processing. "They're using different names, but these were all written by the same individual." More connections emerged, the same contractors appearing to fix violations. Similar patterns in inspection timing, always after refusing HOA membership or buyout offers. "But how do we fight city officials who are in Vale's pocket?" Mr. Henderson asked. "We don't," Sarah smiled. "We go above them. She nodded to Diana, who pulled out federal environmental protection guidelines. Vale didn't just bury a creek, they buried the paperwork. But water doesn't care about paperwork. They organized into teams. Margaret and the Martinezes would compile documentation of all inspections and violations. The Hendersons would gather historic preservation records. Elena would analyze documents for more evidence of falsified inspections. Sarah's studio would become their secure evidence storage, its multiple security cameras and backup systems protecting their growing case file. Emma coordinated the creation of a secure cloud database, ensuring no evidence could be lost or accidentally destroyed. As they worked, more neighbors joined them. Even some Willow Creek residents, concerned about their home's structural issues, began quietly sharing information. Sarah's phone buzzed. Another text from Patricia. "Heard you're having a little gathering. Shame if the fire marshal found out about unauthorized public assemblies in that old bakery." Minutes later, they heard sirens. But Margaret just smiled and pulled out her events permit, filed that morning for a Community Historical Society meeting. "They're not the only ones who know how to work the system," she said with a wink. The fire marshal, looking somewhat embarrassed, left after a brief inspection. Through the window, Sarah spotted Alexander Wright, watching from his Mercedes, his usual smug expression replaced by concern. "They're worried," Diana observed. "They should be. One business owner they can pressure, one historic property they can condemn. But an organized community response, with documented evidence of systematic harassment, that's harder to bury than a creek." Sarah looked around at her neighbors. No longer victims, but allies, each bringing their own strengths to the fight. Margaret was already talking about converting her bakery into a temporary welcome center for their historic district preservation. "Group, Vale Development thinks they're building something here," Sarah said to the group. "They are, just not what they planned. They're building a community, one that fights back." Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Robert Grayson. "Just heard from my contact in planning. Vale's requesting an emergency rezoning hearing. They're accelerating their timeline. Whatever you're planning, do it soon." Sarah shared the message with the group. The time for gathering evidence was ending. Now they needed action. "Ready?" she asked her newfound allies. The determined faces around her were answer enough. Vale Development had spent years dividing their community. They never expected their targets to unite. Their mistake. Sarah sat in a conference room at Chen & Associates, law firm, surrounded by a team of legal experts Diana had assembled. The mahogany table was covered with documents, and a large screen displayed key evidence they'd gathered. Environmental violations, fraudulent inspections, securities fraud with the pre-sold units, Diana listed, pacing at the head of the table. "But Vale Development's legal team is formidable. They'll try to bury us in motions, delay until the historic properties are too damaged to save. Then we hit them where they're vulnerable," interjected Michael Torres, a real estate attorney Diana had brought in. "Those pre-sales contracts for Phase 3, they're selling properties they don't own, on land that's still historically protected. That's not just unethical, it's criminal." Sarah spread out her enhanced photos from Wright's laptop screen. "And here's proof they knew it. Internal emails discussing how to hide the sales from regulatory oversight." The legal team pored over the images. Sarah had spent hours in her darkroom, using every trick she knew to bring out details from the reflected screen. The results were damning, clear evidence of Vale Development's executives discussing their acceleration strategy. "They're getting desperate," Diana noted, pointing to recent satellite images of the development. "See these stress fractures in their new construction? The diverted water flow is causing more damage than they anticipated. They need to start their ground stabilization work soon, or their whole project could literally sink." "What about the Historical Society angle?" asked Jennifer Reeves, a preservation law specialist. "Those homes are protected. They can't just demolish them." Sarah pulled up more documents on the screen. Unless they're condemned for safety reasons, look at the pattern. Every historic property they want suddenly develops structural issues right after refusing to sell. And the inspectors signing off on these condemnations? Michael leaned forward. All tied to Vale's preferred contractors. We need to move fast, Diana said. Vale's requesting an emergency rezoning hearing. They'll claim public safety concerns. Due to soil instability they caused by burying the creek. Sarah's phone buzzed. Emma sending updates from the studio. More negative reviews had appeared overnight, now targeting not just Sarah's business, but all the historic district properties. The Hendersons' bed and breakfast had been flagged for health violations. Margaret's bakery equipment had mysteriously failed certification. They're escalating across the board, Sarah observed, trying to force everyone out before we can build our case. Then we escalate too, Diana decided. She pulled out a thick folder. I've already contacted the EPA and the Securities Exchange Commission. With the evidence we have, they're very interested. But federal investigations take time. Time we don't have, Sarah pointed out. The rezoning hearing is in 2 weeks. Jennifer smiled for the first time. Maybe not. Those pre-sale contracts? Vale's using them to secure financing for the current construction. If word gets out about potential federal investigations, their funding could freeze, Michael finished. Construction stops, giving us time to complete the federal case. But we have to be careful, Diana warned. Vale has deep pockets and political connections. They'll come at us hard. Sarah thought about her destroyed garden, the vandalized studio, her struggling neighbors. They already are. At least this way we're fighting back. The legal team spent hours crafting their strategy. They would file multiple actions simultaneously: environmental protection suits, historical preservation challenges, securities fraud complaints. Each action carefully designed to expose another aspect of Vale's schemes. What about the HOA itself? Sarah asked. Patricia and the board are clearly acting as Vale's agents. That's our ace, Diana grinned. HOAs have special legal status, but if we can prove they're actually operating as an arm of a development corporation, every fine they've levied, every violation they've issued becomes evidence of corporate fraud. Sarah's phone buzzed again, this time a message from Patricia. Final warning. Back off now, or what happens next is your fault. She showed the message to Diana. They know we're meeting. Good, Diana replied. Let them worry. But Sarah, be careful. Vale's pattern in other cities. When legal pressure starts, accidents tend to happen. Already covered, Sarah assured her. She pulled up her security feeds on her tablet. Every angle of her property was monitored, everything backed up to multiple secure locations. They won't catch me off guard. The meeting concluded with clear assignments for each team member. Jennifer would file the historical preservation challenges. Michael would contact Vale's investors with concerns about the pre-sales. Diana would coordinate with federal agencies. As Sarah packed up her evidence files, Diana pulled her aside. There's something else. My contact at the EPA. They found similar cases in other cities. Vale's done this before, but they've always managed to settle quietly. Usually after key evidence disappears or witnesses suddenly change their stories. They won't buy us off, Sarah said firmly. No, Diana agreed, but be prepared. When companies like Vale realize they can't buy something, they try to break it instead. Sarah thought about her camera's most important feature, the ability to capture truth, preserve moments that others might want to forget. Vale Development had spent years hiding their actions in shadows. Time to bring everything into focus. Her. Phone buzzed one more time. Robert Grayson. Activity at City Hall. Vale's lawyers filing emergency motions. Whatever they're planning, it's starting. Sarah straightened her shoulders. The legal team was ready. Her neighbors were united. The evidence was secured. Let Vale Development make their move. This time, someone was watching. The systematic attacks began at dawn. Sarah woke to her phone exploding with notifications. Overnight, hundreds of one-star reviews had flooded every platform where her business was listed. But these weren't the previous amateur attempts. These were sophisticated, seemingly legitimate complaints spanning the past year. They hired a professional review farm, Emma explained, scrolling through the posts. Look at the detail. Specific dates, realistic scenarios, even fake photo evidence they've doctored. One review claimed Sarah had ruined a wedding by showing up drunk. Another alleged she'd lost an entire family's shoot due to equipment failure, then refused to refund them. Each story was crafted to seem authentic, complete with emotional details and supposed correspondence. "My reputation," Sarah whispered, watching her previously perfect rating plummet. Her phone rang. Margaret from the bakery. "They're here again. Third health inspector this week. They're claiming someone reported food poisoning cases from my last week of operation. Sarah, I've been closed for days." Before Sarah could respond, another call came in. The Hendersons' bed and breakfast had just had their insurance cancelled. Apparent anonymous tips about unsafe conditions had made them uninsurable. "It's coordinated," Emma realized, tracking the timing. "They're hitting everyone who met with the lawyers yesterday." Sarah's security system pinged, a delivery truck at her gate. The driver carried a thick stack of certified letters. Legal notices, complaints, cease and desist orders, all requiring immediate response. Each one would need time, money, and legal attention to address. "They're trying to overwhelm us," Sarah said, adding the letters to their evidence file. "Divide our resources, force us to fight on too many fronts." Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Shame about those reviews. Hard to book clients when they think you're unreliable. But the HOA's community center is always available for members." Another text followed. "Wonder how many more complaints it would take for the photography board to review your license." Sarah's hands shook slightly, but she forced them steady. Years of shooting in difficult conditions had taught her to control her reactions. She documented everything, forwarding each threat to Diana. Then the personal attacks started. Her mortgage company called. Someone had reported unauthorized business activity, violating her home loan terms. Her insurance agent emailed about concerns regarding her property use. Even her car insurance was flagged for review because she used her vehicles for business purposes. "They're trying to crack you," Emma observed, watching Sarah field another call. "Death by 1,000 cuts." A sleek car pulled up outside. Alexander Wright stepping out with his ever-present briefcase. Sarah met him at the debris pile, which still hadn't been cleared. "Quite a situation you're facing," he said smoothly. "Insurance issues, licensing, reviews, client complaints. Running a business can be so complicated. Shame if all these problems affected your ability to maintain your property, could lead to code violations." "Is there a point to this visit?" Sarah asked, camera recording as always. "Just offering a solution," Wright smiled. "Vale Development is prepared to be generous. We'll buy your property at market value. Before all these issues impact its worth, you could walk away, start fresh somewhere else, clean slate." Sarah met his gaze. "And my neighbors? They'll face their own choices," Wright shrugged. "But you should consider your position carefully. Legal battles are expensive. Reviews like these," he held up his phone, showing the growing list of complaints. "They tend to stick around. Even if you win in court, your reputation—" "Get off my property." Wright's smile never wavered. "As you wish. But Miss Mitchell, the offer expires at noon. After that, well, social media can be so unpredictable. Things tend to go viral, develop lives of their own. Hard to control the narrative once it starts spreading." After he left, Sarah's phone exploded again. Someone had created a Sarah Mitchell photography victims Facebook group. Fake accounts were sharing manufactured horror stories, complete with doctored photos showing damaged wedding dresses and ruined family portraits. The posts were being shared in local community groups, parent networks, wedding planning forums. Each share spawning more negative comments, more manufactured outrage. "They're trying to make it go viral," Emma said, tracking the spread. "Create so much smoke, people will assume there's fire." Sarah's hands clenched. This was what she did. Control images, shape perceptions. Now they were using her own medium against her. Her phone rang again. Diana. "Sarah, don't react. That's what they want. We expected this, but I need you to check something. Are there any patterns in the review timestamps?" Sarah pulled up the data. "Yes, clusters of posts, all hitting at specific times. Like it was, coordinated, automated," Diana finished. "Mass posting from review farms, which is illegal when used to damage a business. Keep tracking the timestamps. We're building a case for coordinated defamation." Another text arrived. "Patricia this. Time. Noon's coming up, TikTok. Once people think you're unreliable." Well, historical preservation boards take public opinion into account. Hard to justify protecting a problem property. Sarah took a deep breath, steadying herself like she would before a crucial shot. They wanted her to crack, to lash out, to make mistakes. Instead, she did what she did best. She documented everything, captured every detail, preserved every piece of evidence. Let them think their psychological warfare was working. They'd learn soon enough. The best photographers knew how to work in darkness. The city inspector who showed up at Sarah's studio that afternoon wasn't like the previous ones. James Cooper wore a crisp uniform, carried a professional-grade tablet, and exhibited none of Patricia's obvious hostility or Wright's smug confidence. "Just a routine structural inspection, Ms. Mitchell," he said pleasantly, showing proper credentials. "Given the age of the property and recent soil stability concerns in the area, we need to ensure everything's up to code." Sarah recognized the tactic. They were shifting from obvious pressure to something more subtle, harder to fight. She kept her camera rolling as she accompanied him through the property. "Interesting," Cooper murmured, tapping notes into his tablet. "These support beams show signs of stress. Recent movement in the foundation, perhaps." He photographed hairline cracks that Sarah was certain hadn't been there last week. "Those are new," she said firmly, taking her own photos from multiple angles. "And they all appeared after Vale Development started their ground stabilization. Work next door." Cooper's professional demeanor didn't slip. "I don't see any connection to neighboring properties noted in the report. Just concerns about the original construction methods. These historic properties often have issues." Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed. The city planning office. They were reviewing her business permit due to zoning concerns. The historic district's mixed-use designation, which had allowed her to operate her studio for years, was suddenly under scrutiny. "Quite a few regulations about home-based businesses," Cooper commented, somehow aware of the call. "Parking requirements, client volume limitations, impact on residential character, complex situation." Sarah noticed him paying particular attention to her vintage photography props, the ones that hadn't been destroyed. These items, stored in the workspace, potential fire hazard, might need specialized permits for storage of antique materials. Every observation was reasonable sounding, technically within regulations, and designed to create problems. Death by bureaucracy. Emma arrived with more notices. The city's Historical Preservation Board wanted to review their property designation. The zoning board had questions about their certificate of occupancy. Even the Arts Council was reconsidering their business grant from last year. They're using every department they can influence, Sarah realized, watching Cooper photograph her electrical panel. Creating a paper trail of concerns they can use later. Her phone buzzed again. Diana this time. "Sarah, Document everything this inspector does. We've traced his certification. It's real but recent. Very recent. Like issued last week. Recent. Cooper spent 3 hours going through every inch of the property. Each observation was carefully worded. Technically accurate, but framed to suggest problems. The final report, which he printed on the spot, listed 27 items requiring immediate attention. You'll need licensed contractors to verify these repairs, he explained smoothly. I have a list of approved vendors. Let me guess, Sarah interrupted. All connected to Vale Development. Cooper's smile didn't waver. Just following procedures, Ms. Mitchell. You have 30 days to address these items. Of course, any items deemed immediate safety concerns might require faster action. After he left, Sarah and Emma reviewed the report. Each violation seemed designed to be expensive, time-consuming, and difficult to dispute. Fixing everything would cost thousands, assuming they could even find contractors willing to work on a historic property under scrutiny. They're drowning us in red tape, Emma observed, organizing the growing stack of notices and demands. Every fix will need permits, every permit will need inspections, every inspection will find new problems. Sarah's phone rang. Margaret from the bakery. She'd received an almost identical inspection report with equally impossible demands. So had the Hendersons. All from different departments, all citing various regulations, all requiring immediate expensive fixes. It's not just harassment anymore, Sarah said, photographing each document for their legal team. They're creating an official record they can use to condemn our properties. Make it look legitimate when they force us out. Her security system pinged. Another official vehicle pulling up. This time it was the fire marshal, here to conduct an emergency safety review of her storage methods for photography chemicals and vintage materials. Ms. Mitchell, the fire marshal was all business. We received an anonymous tip about hazardous materials storage, given the historic nature of the property and the proximity to residential areas. Sarah felt a chill. She didn't even use dangerous chemicals. She'd switched to digital years ago, and her few film projects used a professional lab, but disproving false allegations would take time and money they couldn't spare. Her phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Regulations can be so complicated. Shame when good businesses get caught up in red tape, but HOA members have access to our compliance assistance program. Another text followed from an unknown number. Wonder what other violations a really thorough inspection might find. Historic properties have so many potential issues. Sarah took a deep breath, steadying herself like she would before a challenging shot. They were using the system itself as a weapon, turning regulations meant to protect properties into tools for destruction. But Sarah had learned something important shooting historic buildings. The right angle could reveal hidden strengths. Beneath apparent flaws, Vale Development might control the inspectors, but they didn't control the evidence, and Sarah had been documenting everything. The attack came at 3 a.m. Sarah jolted awake to her security system's urgent alerts. Multiple camera feeds showed dark figures moving through her garden, their faces obscured. They worked with practiced efficiency, targeting specific areas. Her vintage rose bushes, irreplaceable heritage varieties she'd spent years cultivating, were being systematically destroyed. Not just cut, but dug out by the roots. The antique garden fixtures were being smashed. Even the historic brick pathways were being torn up. Sarah immediately triggered the security lights and alarm, but the vandals seemed prepared. They wore dark clothing that obscured their features and moved with purpose, as if following a plan. These weren't random teenagers. This was a professional hit. "Emma!" Sarah called, already dialing 911. "Get the drone up now!" The police response was frustratingly slow. By the time officers arrived, the damage was done. Her garden, the backdrop for countless wedding photos and family portraits, lay in ruins. Even the soil had been contaminated, something poured over the grounds that left a chemical smell hanging in the air. Probably herbicide, one officer noted, looking bored. Hard to prove who did it, though. No clear faces on your security footage. But Sarah had caught something they'd missed. The drone's infrared camera had captured heat signatures of vehicles parked just outside camera range, including a familiar black Mercedes. Her phone buzzed. Right. Gardens can be so difficult to maintain, especially with soil stability issues. Maybe it's time to consider more modern landscaping options. As dawn broke, revealing the full extent of the destruction, Sarah felt something crack inside her. This wasn't just property damage. This was personal. They'd attacked the heart of her business, the unique setting that drew clients from across the state. Emma arrived, taking in the devastation. Sarah, the wedding shoot today, the garden arch, the historic arch, a centerpiece for ceremonies, lay splintered beyond repair. They had 6 weddings booked in the next month, all counting on the garden setting they'd fallen in love with during their consultations. Sarah's phone began ringing, clients seeing the negative reviews, hearing rumors, worried about their events. Each call twisted the knife deeper. Her business wasn't just under attack, it was being systematically dismantled. Then she noticed something else. Her studio's main power line had been tampered with, the connection to the pole damaged just enough to look accidental. One good storm, and she'd lose electricity to her climate-controlled storage area, where she kept her backup drives and archived materials. They're not just destroying the present, she realized. They're trying to erase everything I've built. A city utilities truck pulled up. The worker seemed unsurprised by the garden's destruction. Got a report about potential code violations, he said, checking a tablet. Need to inspect all utility connections. Might have to shut off service if we find any issues. Sarah's hands shook as she took photos of the damage, but years of photography had taught her to steady herself, even in crisis. Each shot was clear, documented, time-stamped. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of sloppy evidence. Her phone buzzed again. Patricia. Such a shame about the garden. But our community centre has lovely indoor photo facilities, perfect for photographers who can't maintain their properties properly. Another message followed from an unknown number. Gardens die. Buildings burn. Accidents happen. Is your archive backup really safe? The threat was clear. They were escalating, moving from harassment to destruction, testing how far they could go. Diana arrived within the hour, taking in the scene with cold fury. This is beyond corporate bullying. This is criminal intimidation. Can we prove it? Sarah asked, showing her the drone footage. The infrared signatures help, but... Diana paused, noticing something in the garden debris. Wait, the chemical they used? If it's what I think. She pulled out her phone, making calls. Within an hour, an environmental testing team arrived. The results were decisive. The substance poured on Sarah's garden was a restricted herbicide, one that required special licensing. Guess who holds the only local permits for this chemical? Diana smiled grimly. Vale Developments Landscaping, subsidiary. Sarah felt a glimmer of hope, but it was short-lived. Her phone lit up with another alert. Someone had posted pictures of her neglected property on community forums. The garden destruction was being spun as evidence of her inability to maintain a historic property. The utilities worker was still finding problems that would require extensive repairs. Each issue would mean more inspections, more delays, more costs she couldn't afford while her business was under attack. They're trying to break you, Emma said quietly. Make you give up before the legal case can move forward. Sarah looked at her ruined garden, thinking of all the moments she'd captured there. Weddings, engagements, families marking milestones. Each image preserved not just people, but pieces of history. Her phone buzzed one final time. Right again. Still time to accept our offer. Before any more unfortunate incidents occur. Sarah's grip tightened on her camera. They thought destroying her garden would break her spirit, but they'd forgotten something crucial. Photographers knew how to find beauty even in devastation, and she was about to show them just how revealing the right exposure could be. Diana's office had transformed into a command center. Every available surface was covered with documents, photos, and evidence files. Sarah, Emma, and their growing team of allies worked methodically, organizing months of documentation into a devastating case against Vale Development. "Look at this pattern," Sarah said, spreading out aerial photos of their properties. Her photographer's eye had caught something others missed. Every historic property they've targeted shows the same sequence. First, drainage issues appear, then structural problems. Finally, emergency condemnations. Emma pulled up their timeline on a large monitor, and each problem starts right after Vale begins ground stabilization work nearby. They're deliberately destabilizing properties by disrupting the underground. Water flow. Diana nodded, adding the photos to their federal filing. The EPA's very interested in this. Deliberate manipulation of protected waterways for development purposes? That's felony territory. Their evidence wall told the story clearly, maps showing the original creek's path overlaid with property damage reports. Inspection records revealing the same handwriting under different names. Financial documents tracing Vale's shell companies back to their source. "Here's something interesting," Margaret called from her station. She'd been analyzing Vale's permit applications. The dates on their environmental impact studies? They're using old data from before they buried the creek. Every current approval is based on outdated information. Sarah's security feeds pinged. Alexander Wright's Mercedes was circling the block again. They'd gotten under his skin. The precision of their evidence gathering was clearly making Vale nervous. Their whole house of cards depends on keeping things buried, Diana observed, both literally and figuratively, but water always finds a way to the surface. Sarah's phone buzzed with messages from more neighbors joining their cause. Each brought new pieces to the puzzle. The Hendersons had found irregularities in Vale's historical preservation filings. Elena Martinez had tracked patterns in the falsified inspection reports. They never expected us to compare notes, Sarah realized. Each property owner was supposed to feel isolated, overwhelmed. Classic divide and conquer, Diana agreed. But now we're building something they can't easily tear down. Documented proof of systematic fraud. Emma pulled up the latest satellite imagery. The stress fractures in their new construction are getting worse. They're running out of time to fix their water problem. Sarah studied the images, thinking like a photographer. That's why they're getting aggressive. Their whole project is at risk. If they can't control the historic properties, the diverted water flow will eventually undermine everything they've built, Diana finished. Their investors would panic if this got out. They worked through the night, organizing evidence into clear categories: environmental violations, permit fraud, falsified inspections, coordinated harassment, property damage, and illegal business practices. Sarah's security system caught more. Suspicious activity. Figures testing her property's boundaries, quick drive-bys photographing her studio. Vale was watching, worried. "They're planning something big," Emma warned, monitoring the feeds. "All this surveillance—" "Let them," Sarah replied, checking her backup systems. "Every move they make just adds to our evidence." Diana received an urgent call from her EPA contact. Vale just filed emergency permits for major construction. They're claiming critical infrastructure repairs. They're accelerating their timeline, Sarah realized, trying to start work before we can stop them, but their preparation was paying off. Every piece of evidence had multiple backups. Their documentation was meticulous, time-stamped, and verified. They'd created a paper trail that couldn't be easily buried or dismissed. "Look at this," Margaret called, examining financial records. The shell company that owns those dump trucks, it just received a massive transfer from Vale's main account. They're mobilizing resources, Diana noted. Probably planning to start their emergency repairs as soon as possible, once they break ground. They can destroy evidence of the original creek bed, Sarah finished. She pulled up her latest drone footage, showing subtle ground movements around Vale's properties. But the water's already telling its own story. Their evidence wall had become a damning tapestry of corporate fraud and environmental crime. Each photo, document, and report connected to others, revealing the full scope of Vale's schemes. "We're ready," Diana announced, reviewing their federal filings. EPA, SEC, FBI, they're all interested now. Once we submit this, Vale will fight back hard, Sarah warned. They have too much to lose. That's why we're not just filing federal cases, Diana smiled. We're going public. Your documentation, especially the drone footage of water damage, tells a story anyone can understand. Corporate greed destroying historic properties and endangering new homeowners, that's front-page material. Sarah's phone buzzed one last time. Right again. Final chance. Tomorrow will be too late. She added his message to their evidence file, another thread in their tapestry of proof. Vale thought they were just fighting a photographer who took pretty pictures. Time to show them the power of proper exposure. Diana began preparing the final filings. Tomorrow, everything would come to light. The question wasn't whether Vale would react. The question was, were they ready for what would happen when they did? Late that night, as Sarah reviewed security footage, her system detected movement at the property's edge. A figure stood in the shadows, deliberately avoiding camera angles. But something was different about this visitor. They seemed hesitant, uncertain. "I've got motion on the east side," Emma reported through their security channel. "Single individual, no visible weapons. They're waiting." Sarah checked her camera feeds. The figure wasn't trying to vandalize anything or plant evidence. They were trying to get her attention while staying hidden from street views. "Keep the drone ready," Sarah instructed, grabbing her camera. "If anything seems off..." "Already on. Backup cameras running." The visitor turned out to be a young woman in Vale Development corporate attire, clutching a laptop bag. Her employee badge identified her as Jessica Torres, executive assistant to Alexander Wright. "Please," Jessica whispered, constantly glancing over her shoulder. "I don't have much time. They'll notice if I'm gone too long." Sarah led her inside, while Emma monitored the surroundings for followers. Jessica's hands shook as she pulled out her laptop and a flash drive. "I've been Mr. Wright's assistant for 3 years, she began. "At first, I thought Vale was just another development company. But these past few months, watching what they're doing to you, to all these properties," she took a deep breath. "I can't be part of it anymore." She opened her laptop, revealing hundreds of internal emails, meeting minutes and private communications. "They're not just trying to force you out. This whole project, it's built on fraud. The water diversion, the false permits, the pre-sales. It goes deeper than you know." Sarah quickly began photographing the screen, while Emma started secure downloads of the data. The documents revealed a stunning web of corruption. "The HOA was never real," Jessica explained. "It's a shell entity created specifically to pressure holdout properties. Those dues they're demanding, the money goes straight to Vale's accounts. But the real bombshell was in the project timeline. They knew about the water problems from the beginning. Their own geological surveys showed the risks, but Mr. Wright said it was cheaper to deal with lawsuits than fix the design. The internal communications were damning. Emails discussing which officials to bribe, which properties to target, how to create accidents that would force sales. "Last week I overheard Mr. Wright on the phone," Jessica continued, her voice dropping lower. "They're planning something big. The garden destruction was just a test. They're talking about a final solution for the historic properties." Sarah's blood ran cold. What kind of solution? I don't know exactly, but Jessica pulled up more files. They've hired a demolition company. On paper, it's for the next construction phase. But look at the equipment they're bringing in. It's way more than they'd need for approved work. The documents showed plans for extensive excavation around the historic properties. Under the guise of emergency repairs, they intended to deliberately undermine foundations. Once they start digging, Jessica explained, the damage will be irreversible. They'll create enough structural issues that condemning the properties will be automatic. When? Sarah asked, already downloading everything she could. 3 days. They're rushing because, Jessica hesitated, because of you. Your evidence gathering, the federal investigations you're building. They know they're running out of time. She pulled up one final email chain, messages between Wright and Patricia, discussing their contingency plan if legal pressure became too intense. They're willing to sacrifice the entire first phase of development, Jessica revealed. Let it fail due to water damage, blame it on the historic properties, use the crisis to force emergency demolition orders. Hundreds of families live in those homes, Sarah protested. They deliberately destroy their own project? The insurance payout would fund the next phase, and the crisis would give them leverage to push through rezoning without normal oversight. Jessica's voice shook. They don't care who gets hurt. Sarah's security system pinged. Car movements. On the street, Jessica quickly packed her laptop. I have to go. They track our vehicles, our phones. She handed Sarah the flash drive. Everything's here, financial records, emails, meeting recordings, but be careful. If they realize I leaked this, we'll protect you, Sarah promised. Diana has experience. With whistleblower protections, Jessica managed a weak smile. Just stop them before more people get hurt. She slipped out as carefully as she'd arrived. After she left, Sarah and Emma began processing the new evidence. The flash drive was a goldmine, proof of every suspicion they'd had and more. This changes everything, Emma said, reviewing the files. With this level of documentation, Sarah's phone buzzed, Diana responding to the evidence they'd forwarded. This is exactly what we needed. Internal proof of criminal conspiracy. How soon can your whistleblower meet with federal agents? But before Sarah could respond, another alert came through. Jessica Torres's corporate account had just sent out an emergency all-staff email. She was taking an unexpected leave of absence for personal reasons. Vale was moving faster than they'd anticipated. The question was, could they move faster? Sarah stared at her security feeds, watching the pre-dawn darkness. Somewhere out there, Vale's demolition equipment was being prepared. They had 3 days to stop a corporate giant from destroying not just her property, but an entire community. The flash drive felt heavy in her hand, proof of everything, but only if they could act in time. The next move would decide everything. The emergency city council meeting was packed. Vale Development had pushed through their critical infrastructure hearing with barely 24 hours' notice, but Sarah and her allies were ready. The chamber buzzed with tension as Alexander Wright approached the podium, his usual confidence on full display. Council members, we face an urgent situation, Wright began smoothly. Recent geological surveys have revealed critical soil stability issues in the historic district. For public safety, we need immediate approval for emergency remediation work. Sarah sat with Diana and their team, watching Wright present Vale's carefully crafted narrative. His slides showed dramatically angled photos of property damage, strategic angles making minor issues look catastrophic. The aging infrastructure of these historic properties is creating dangerous conditions, Wright continued. Our engineers recommend immediate excavation and stabilization work. Any delay could put lives at risk. Patricia Henderson, sitting with other HOA board members, nodded emphatically at every point. The council members seemed to be buying the story until Diana stood up. Before voting, the council should review some additional evidence, she announced, connecting her laptop to the chamber's display system, starting with Vale Development's original geological surveys. The screens filled with Jessica's leaked documents. Wright's composed expression cracked slightly as he recognized internal emails and meeting minutes. These records show Vale knew about water flow issues years ago, Diana continued. In fact, they deliberately created the problem by burying Willow Creek without proper environmental impact studies. Sarah stood next, adding her own documentation. This drone footage shows the progression of damage after Vale's ground stabilization work began. The time-lapse images clearly showed how problems appeared only after Vale's interference. Wright tried to interrupt. These documents appear to be stolen corporate property obtained through legal whistleblower channels, Diana corrected, along with evidence of systematic harassment, fraudulent inspections, and environmental violations. The EPA is very interested in Vale's water management practices. The chamber erupted in murmurs as Sarah displayed more photos: the destroyed gardens, the falsified inspection reports, the pattern of targeted harassment. Vale isn't trying to fix a problem, Sarah declared. They're trying to destroy historic properties to clear land for their next development phase, and they're willing to sacrifice their own homeowners to do it. Wright's facade finally cracked. These are baseless accusations. Actually, a new voice interrupted. Jessica Torres stood at the back of the chamber. Despite visible nervousness, her voice carried clearly. I can confirm everything they're saying. As Mr. Wright's executive assistant, I witnessed their entire strategy. The council chamber exploded into chaos. Patricia tried to approach Jessica, but federal agents who had been quietly waiting suddenly moved to intercept her. Vale Development and the Willow Creek HOA are under federal investigation, Diana announced, for environmental violations, securities fraud, and criminal conspiracy. Wright's phone buzzed loudly. Sarah could see panic in his eyes as he read the message. This meeting is a farce, he declared. We're trying to prevent a public safety crisis like this crisis. Sarah queued up her latest drone footage. This morning's images of Vale's newest construction phase. Notice the growing foundation damage caused by the same water issues you're claiming you need to fix? The footage was damning. Cracks spreading through Vale's luxury homes, stress fractures in walls, shifting foundations, all following the path of the buried creek. Those images are misleading. Wright started, but council members were already pulling up their own phones, receiving alarmed messages from Vale homeowners about growing property damage. Vale's solution isn't to fix the water problem, Sarah continued. It's to dig up historic properties, redirect more water flow, and hide the evidence. Meanwhile, their own homeowners face catastrophic property damage. Jessica stepped forward. Again, the demolition equipment is already staged. They plan to start excavation tomorrow, without permits if necessary. The goal was to cause so much damage that emergency condemnation would be automatic. Wright's composure finally shattered. You have no idea what's at stake, he snarled. This whole project is built on fraud, Diana finished. Like these pre-sale contracts for properties you don't own, on land that's still historically protected. Federal agents moved closer as Wright looked desperately for an escape route. Patricia and other HOA board members were already being detained for questioning. Council members, Diana concluded, we're not just asking you to deny Vale's emergency request. We're asking for an immediate stop work order on all Vale projects pending federal investigation. The council's vote was unanimous. As Wright was led away by federal agents, he locked eyes with Sarah. You have no idea what you've done, he spat. When that water damage hits the new properties, we know exactly what we've done. Sarah replied calmly, still documenting everything with her camera. We've exposed the truth. Everything else is just development issues that Vale will have to fix properly this time. The chamber slowly cleared, But Sarah's work wasn't done. Vale's demolition equipment was still staged, their corrupt inspectors still in place, their network of influence still active. They'd won this battle, but the war for the historic district's future was far from over. Still, as Sarah watched federal agents escorting Wright and Patricia away, she allowed herself a small smile. Sometimes the best shots were the ones that revealed what others tried to hide. The federal investigation moved with surprising speed. Within days, Vale Development's offices were sealed, their records seized, and their assets frozen. The evidence Sarah and her allies had gathered, combined with Jessica's insider documentation, created an airtight case. Sarah stood in her garden, surveying the damage Vale had caused. The morning sun cast long shadows across torn earth and broken fixtures, but amidst the destruction, tiny green shoots were already emerging, her heritage roses proving harder to kill than Vale had anticipated. "Just got word from the U.S. Attorney's office," Diana called, walking up the historic brick path. "Wright and Patricia are both facing multiple federal charges: securities fraud, environmental violations, conspiracy. They're looking at serious time." "And the HOA board members?" Sarah asked, photographing the new growth in her garden. "Most are cooperating with investigators," Diana smiled. "Turns out none of them wanted to take the fall for Vale's schemes. They're providing evidence about every fraudulent inspection, every falsified report." Sarah's phone buzzed with updates from their neighborhood group chat. The Martinez family was reopening their restaurant. Margaret's bakery had passed a legitimate health inspection with flying colors. The Hendersons' bed and breakfast was already taking new reservations. "The city council is expediting permits for repairs," Emma reported, joining them with her tablet. "And look at this. They're creating a special historic district preservation board. They want you to be on it." Sarah laughed. "Me? The troublemaker? Who exposed their corruption?" "Exactly you," Diana confirmed. "Someone who proved they'll fight to protect this community's heritage." More news poured in throughout the day. Vale's investors were filing lawsuits after learning about the water damage cover-up. Their luxury development projects were halted pending environmental review. The pre-sold properties in the Phase 3 project were being refunded with penalties. "The EPA's report came in," Diana announced, pulling up documents on her tablet. "They're ordering Vale to restore Willow Creek to its natural flow, full environmental remediation." "What about Vale's homeowners?" Sarah asked, thinking of the families unknowingly bought into Vale's fraudulent development. "That's actually the best part," Diana grinned. "The federal seizure of Vale's assets includes their insurance policies. There's enough coverage to repair all the water damage and properly stabilize the properties. Plus, the new historic district guidelines will protect against future development schemes." Sarah's security system pinged, but this time it wasn't Vale's threats. Local news crews were arriving, wanting to document the story of how a photographer and her neighbors had exposed corporate corruption and saved their historic community. "Ms. Mitchell," a reporter called out, "how did you know to gather so much evidence?" Sarah thought about all the moments she'd captured over the years: weddings, families, celebrations of life's milestones. Each photo preserving not just memories, but pieces of history. "I'm a photographer," she replied simply. "My job is to reveal truth through images." Vale tried to bury their lies, but the evidence was always there. Someone just needed to capture it. The story spread quickly. Other communities facing similar development pressure reached out for advice. Sarah's documentation methods became a template for fighting corporate overreach. The federal investigation expanded to other Vale projects across the country, but the real victory was visible in the small details. Margaret's bakery windows steaming up with fresh bread again, children playing in the Hendersons' garden, the Martinez restaurant's tables full of happy customers. A community not just preserved, but strengthened. Your client reviews are rebounding, Emma reported, showing Sarah their business analytics. The fake negative posts are being removed. And look, bookings for garden wedding photos are actually up. People love the historic preservation angle. Sarah's phone buzzed one last time. A message from Jessica, now protected under federal whistleblower status. Thank you for helping me do the right thing. Some photographs preserve more than just images. Later that evening, Sarah hosted a community gathering in her partially restored garden. Neighbors who had once felt isolated and powerless now moved with confidence, sharing stories of resistance and renewal. To think, Margaret mused, serving her famous pastries, they thought they could break us by turning us against each other. They never understood what makes historic districts special, Sarah replied, watching the sunset paint golden light across restored Victorian facades. It's not just the buildings, it's the community, the shared history, the connections. Her camera captured the moment. Neighbors united, historic homes standing proud, and in the background construction equipment arriving. Not for demolition this time, but for restoration. Vale's attempt to destroy their community had only made it stronger. Diana raised a glass. To the power of proper documentation! And proper exposure, Sarah added, smiling, as she took one final photo of their victory celebration. Vale Development had tried to bury the truth, along with Willow Creek. But like water finding its natural course, some things couldn't be suppressed forever. Sometimes the best preservation happened not just through photographs, but through people willing to stand together and fight for what mattered. The historic district had survived attempts to demolish it before. Thanks to Sarah and her neighbors, it would stand for generations to come. Its story, now including a chapter about a photographer who proved that the right exposure could illuminate more than just images. 3 months after Vale Development's downfall, the historic district was transformed, not by modern development, but by renewal of its original character. Sarah documented the changes through her lens, capturing the community's revival in real time. The most visible change started with Willow Creek itself. EPA-supervised crews had begun the careful work of restoring the natural waterway, undoing Vale's harmful modifications. The once-buried stream now flowed openly through a newly created greenway, its path marked by native plants and carefully preserved historic features. "Look at this," Emma said, reviewing drone footage of the restoration. "The water's already finding its natural course. It's like the land remembers." Sarah's garden had become a symbol of resilience. Local master gardeners, inspired by the fight to preserve historic properties, volunteered to help restore the heritage roses and vintage fixtures. What Vale had tried to destroy was coming back stronger with the community's support. "We're getting calls from other cities," Diana reported during their weekly community meeting, now held in Margaret's thriving bakery. Historic districts facing similar development pressure. They want to know how we fought back. Sarah had created a detailed guide combining her photography with practical advice on documentation and community organizing. Preserving more than images was becoming a handbook for threatened neighborhoods across the country. The Martinez restaurant had expanded, adding a small museum corner displaying photos and documents from their fight against Vale. Tourists actually came to see the historic district that had stood up to corporate developers and stayed for the food, the architecture, and the stories. "Business is better than ever," Elena Martinez beamed, serving coffee to the Preservation Committee. "People appreciate authenticity. They want to be part of something real." The Hendersons' bed and breakfast had a waiting list, with guests specifically requesting rooms with views of the restored creek. Their garden parties, once targeted by Vale's false complaints, were now featured in travel magazines. But the most significant changes were less visible. The community had developed an informal support network, watching out for each other's properties, sharing resources, and maintaining their historic homes together. "Remember how Vale tried to overwhelm us individually?" Margaret asked, bringing out fresh scones for the committee meeting. "Now we have teams of neighbours helping with maintenance, sharing contractor recommendations, even pooling resources for bigger projects." Sarah's security system, once installed for protection against Vale's threats, had evolved into a neighbourhood watch network. Residents could share alerts about legitimate maintenance issues or coordinate responses to actual problems, rather than Vale's manufactured crises. "The new historic district guidelines are being used as a model," Diana announced, showing preliminary reports. "Other cities are adopting our standards for balancing preservation with sustainable development." Sarah's phone buzzed with a different kind of notification. A National Preservation Society wanted to document their success story. Her photos of the community's revival were being featured in an exhibition about grassroots historic preservation. "It's not just about saving old buildings," Sarah explained to the Preservation Society's photographer. "It's about maintaining connections to our past while building stronger communities for the future." The former Vale properties were undergoing their own transformation. With proper water management and structural repairs, the homes were finally stable. Many residents, learning the truth about Vale's schemes, had joined the community's preservation efforts. They tried to pit the new developments against the historic district, Emma observed, updating their community website. "Instead, we're showing how both can thrive together." Sarah's studio had become an unofficial community centre. Her clients now posed not just in her restored garden, but throughout the historic district. Each photo session helped document the neighbourhood's ongoing revival. "People want their family photos taken here because of what this place represents," Sarah explained during a wedding consultation. "It's not just about pretty backgrounds. It's about being part of a community that stands together." The Preservation Committee, born from their fight against Vale, had evolved into a proactive force for community improvement. They organized workshops on historic home maintenance, coordinated with city planners on sustainable development, and helped other neighborhoods protect their own character. "Vale thought they could erase our history," Margaret mused during one committee meeting. "Instead, they made us more determined to preserve it." Sarah captured it all: the restored creek flowing freely, historic homes standing proud, neighbors working together. Each image told part of their story, not just of resistance, but of renewal. Her phone buzzed with a final piece of news. The federal investigation had expanded to Vale's projects in other states. More communities were coming forward, inspired by their success. "Sometimes the best preservation happens through community," Sarah told the Preservation Society interviewer. "When people connect with their history, with each other, they create something developers can't buy or bury." The historic district had not just survived, it had flourished. Vale's attempt to destroy their community had instead revealed its true strength: the connections between neighbors, the value of shared history, and the power of people standing together to protect what mattered. As Sarah photographed another sunset over the restored creek, she realized Vale had been right about one thing: change was inevitable. But the most important changes weren't always the ones you could see in a skyline. Sometimes they were written in the small moments, the daily acts of preservation, and the growing bonds between neighbors who had discovered their collective strength. That was something worth preserving, one photograph at a time. 1 year after the Vale development showdown, Sarah stood in her studio, surrounded by photographs documenting the historic district's journey. Her business hadn't just recovered, it had evolved into something deeper, more meaningful than she'd ever imagined. "Your work has changed," Emma observed, helping arrange prints for an upcoming gallery exhibition. These aren't just pretty pictures anymore. Sarah studied a series of images tracking the community's transformation. Each photo told part of their story. The destruction of her garden contrasted with its renewal, historic homes standing defiant against modern encroachment, neighbors united in preservation efforts. "I used to think my job was capturing moments," Sarah replied, adjusting a frame. "Now I understand it's about preserving truth. Every photograph is a piece of evidence, a record of what we're fighting to protect." Her client base had shifted, too. While she still shot weddings and family portraits, she'd developed a reputation for documentary photography. Historic preservation societies commissioned her to document threatened neighborhoods. Community organizations sought her expertise in using visual evidence to fight corporate overreach. "Remember how Vale tried to destroy your reputation?" Emma pulled up their old social media feeds. The fake negative reviews had been buried under an avalanche of genuine praise, not just for Sarah's photography, but for her role in saving the historic district. "They thought attacking my business would make me give up," Sarah mused, reviewing a new client contract. The National Trust for Historic Preservation wanted her to train other photographers in documentation techniques. They never understood what we were really fighting for. Her studio itself reflected the change. The vintage props Vale had destroyed had been replaced with pieces that told stories. Salvaged architectural elements from restored homes, artifacts from the community's history, each item carefully documented and preserved. "Your sessions are different now too," Emma noted, watching Sarah prepare for an afternoon shoot. "You're not just taking pictures, you're preserving histories." It was true. Sarah had started interviewing her clients, recording the stories behind their photos. Family histories intertwined with architectural heritage, personal milestones marked against the backdrop of preserved landmarks. "People come here now because they want to be part of something larger," Sarah explained, adjusting her camera settings. "Every wedding in the garden, every family portrait on a historic porch, it's an act of preservation." Her security system, once installed for protection against Vale's threats, had evolved into a teaching tool. She showed other communities how to document threats to their heritage, how to gather evidence that would stand up in court. "You've become more than a photographer," Diana remarked during one of her frequent visits. "You're a guardian of community, memory." Sarah's phone buzzed with messages from across the country. Other photographers asking advice, preservation groups seeking consultation, communities facing their own development battles. She answered each one, sharing the lessons they'd learned. "Vale tried to erase our history," Sarah told a group of visiting preservationists, "but they taught us something valuable instead. The power of documentation, the importance of community, and the strength we find in standing together." Her own growth showed in unexpected ways. She was more confident in community meetings, more assertive in dealing with authorities, more strategic in her business decisions. The fight had changed her, but not in the way Vale intended. "You know, what's ironic?" Emma said, reviewing their client calendar. "Vale wanted to force you out of business. Instead, they made you more successful than ever." It was true. Sarah's combination of artistic skill and documentary expertise had created a unique niche. Clients valued not just her technical ability, but her understanding of history, community, and preservation. "Success isn't just about profit," Sarah replied, preparing her camera for the day's sessions. "It's about impact. Every photo we take helps preserve something valuable, a moment, a place, a piece of history." Her garden, once Vale's target for destruction, had become a symbol of resilience. The heritage roses bloomed more vibrantly than ever, their survival a testament to the power of roots that ran deep. Sarah often found herself there at dawn, capturing The interplay of light and shadow, remembering how close they'd come to losing it all. You've inspired others, Diana told her, showing reports from other communities successfully fighting aggressive development. Your story gives people hope. Sarah's phone lit up with another message. A young photographer asking advice about documenting her own neighborhood's historic character. The questions reminded Sarah of herself, before Vale's threats had forced her to dig deeper, fight harder, see more clearly. Document everything, she wrote back. Not just the buildings, but the people, the stories, the connections. That's what we're really preserving. Later that day, photographing a family against the backdrop of their restored Victorian home, Sarah realized how much her perspective had shifted. Every click of the shutter wasn't just capturing an image, it was recording a moment in their community's continuing story. Vale thought they could break us by attacking our properties, she reflected, reviewing the day's shots. They never understood that real strength isn't in buildings, it's in the people who preserve them, the memories we create, the communities we build. Her transformation was complete. She wasn't just a photographer anymore, she was a chronicler, a preservationist, a guardian of community heritage. Vale's attempts to destroy her had instead revealed her true purpose. Sometimes the best growth came from the hardest fights, and Sarah Mitchell had emerged stronger, clearer in her vision, and more determined than ever to preserve what mattered most. 2 years after Vale's downfall, Sarah sat in the newly established Historic District Protection Office, reviewing applications for property modifications. What had started as an informal neighborhood committee had evolved into an official city department with real power to prevent future development schemes. "Look at this," Emma said, pulling up their comprehensive database. Every historic property in the district was now thoroughly documented. Architectural features, historical significance, and most importantly, legal protections, all carefully recorded and preserved. Remember how Vale exploited gaps in property records? Sarah adjusted her camera, preparing to document another historic home for their archives. Now every deed, every easement, every historic designation is triple verified and backed up in multiple locations. The Protection Office had implemented Sarah's documentation system citywide. Regular drone surveys tracked water flow patterns, foundation stability, and any unauthorized construction activity. What began as her personal security measures had become a model for historic preservation. The new Oversight Committee meets, and tomorrow, Emma reminded her, checking their schedule, they want to review the updated preservation guidelines. Sarah had helped draft those guidelines, incorporating lessons from their fight against Vale. Each regulation was designed to prevent the kinds of manipulation Vale had attempted. No more shell companies hiding behind HOAs, no more fraudulent inspection schemes. "Got another call from the State Preservation Office," Diana announced, walking in with fresh coffee. "They're adopting our water management protocols. Turns out, lots of historic districts have buried waterways developers tried to ignore." Their morning meeting covered various protection initiatives. The community had created a legal defense fund for historic properties, ensuring no homeowner would face corporate pressure alone. Regular workshops taught residents how to maintain their properties while preserving historical character. The latest applications for the grant program just came in, Emma reported, pulling up the files. They'd established a fund to help historic property owners with maintenance costs, removing one of the pressure points Vale had tried to exploit. Sarah reviewed security footage from their new district-wide monitoring system. Motion sensors, cameras, and environmental monitors created a web of protection across the neighborhood. Any suspicious activity triggered immediate alerts to both residents and authorities. "Remember how Vale used to send fake inspectors?" Diana smiled, showing their new verification system. Every official inspector now carried digitally verified credentials, their reports automatically cross-checked against established standards. The Preservation Committee had grown too. Regular meetings brought together homeowners, businesses, and preservation experts. They shared resources, coordinated maintenance projects, and watched for any signs of corporate encroachment. The water monitoring stations are showing interesting data, Sarah noted, reviewing environmental reports. They'd installed sensors throughout the restored creek system, tracking water flow and ground stability. No one could secretly divert. Water flow again. Their success had sparked a movement. Other historic districts sought their advice, implementing similar protection measures. Sarah regularly hosted workshops teaching other communities how to document and defend their heritage. "Just the sea. Legal framework is solid now," Diana explained during one training session. "We've closed the loopholes Vale exploited. Any attempt at similar manipulation would trigger immediate red flags." Sarah's phone buzzed with updates from their early warning system. A development company had just purchased land near the district's borders. Within minutes, their database had pulled up the company's history, ownership structure, and any connections to known bad actors. "Knowledge is protection," Sarah told a group of visiting preservationists. "Document everything, share information, stay connected. Make it impossible for anyone to isolate and pressure individual properties." The Protection Office maintained detailed files on every development proposal affecting the district. Each project faced rigorous environmental and historical impact reviews. No more rushed approvals, no more hidden agendas. "We're not just reactive anymore," Emma observed, updating their threat assessment protocols. "We can spot potential problems before they become crises." Sarah reviewed applications for new businesses in the district. Each one had to demonstrate commitment to historical preservation and community values. The economic vitality of the area proved historic character and modern commerce could coexist. "The best protection is community engagement," Sarah explained to a newspaper reporter. "When people understand what they're preserving, they become active guardians of their heritage." Their documentation center had become a model for other cities. Regular photographic surveys, detailed architectural records, and oral histories created a comprehensive archive of the district's character. Every significant feature was recorded, every modification tracked. Vale thought they could erase our history, Diana mused, reviewing their quarterly preservation report. Instead, they pushed us to preserve it more thoroughly than ever. Sarah's phone lit up with another alert, this time positive. Their monitoring system had identified a property owner doing exemplary preservation work. The community recognition program celebrating those who maintained historic character had become as important as their protection measures. "We're not just preventing destruction," Sarah said, preparing to document another preservation success story. "We're encouraging proper stewardship." The Protection Office coordinated with city planners, ensuring new development complemented rather than threatened historic areas. They'd proven that progress didn't require destroying heritage. Later that day, Sarah walked through the district, camera in hand. Every historic home stood proud, every business thrived, and the restored creek flowed freely. Vale's attempt to destroy their community had instead taught them how to protect it forever. Sometimes the best defense was building something stronger than what your opponents tried to tear down. The historic district hadn't just survived, it had created a blueprint for preservation that would guard its heritage for generations to come. 3 years to the day after Vale Development's truck first blocked her driveway, Sarah stood in a flourishing garden, camera in hand, capturing the morning light filtering through her restored heritage roses. The moment felt poetic. The same angle, the same early hour, but everything had changed. Where Vale had once tried to force her out, Sarah's studio had become a cornerstone of the community. The historic district hadn't just survived, it had become a national model for preservation and community resistance. Her driveway, once blocked by threatening vehicles, now welcomed clients from across the country who came not just for photos, but for the story of triumph they represented. "Hard to believe it's been 3 years," Emma said, joining her with morning coffee. They reviewed the day's schedule on their tablet, a mix of photo sessions, preservation committee meetings, and consultations with other communities facing similar battles. "Look what came in," Emma continued, pulling up their latest analytics. The negative reviews Vale had once used to attack them had become buried under thousands of authentic testimonials. People specifically sought out Sarah's studio because of its role in saving the historic district. The morning light caught the restored garden arch, now draped with climbing roses that had refused to die despite Vale's attempts to poison them. Like the community itself, they had come back stronger, more vibrant than before. Sarah's phone buzzed, with its morning updates, but no longer with threats. Instead, she received reports from their community protection network, updates from preservation projects across the country, and messages from other photographers learning to document their own community's heritage. "Remember what Wright said. That day in the council chamber?" Diana asked, arriving for their morning meeting. "You have no idea what you've done." He was right, just not in the way he meant. They had done far more than stop one developer's scheme. They'd created a movement, showing other communities how to fight back against corporate bullying and preserve their heritage. The historic district had become a blueprint for resistance and renewal. The Martinez restaurant was hosting a preservation workshop that afternoon. Margaret's Bakery had become a regular meeting spot for community organizers. The Hendersons' Bed and Breakfast ran educational tours about historic architecture and community activism. "Vale thought they could divide us," Margaret said later, serving fresh pastries at their weekly community meeting. "Instead, they showed us our strength." Sarah reviewed recent photos on her studio wall, not just client portraits, but documentation of their journey. The destroyed garden contrasted with its renewal, historic homes standing proud against modern pressure, neighbors united in purpose. Each image told part of their story. "The best preservation isn't just about buildings," Sarah explained to a visiting preservation group. "It's about community, about people coming together to protect what matters. About understanding that our heritage isn't just in our architecture, it's in our connections to each other." Her phone lit up with another message, a young photographer in another state, facing similar development pressure, asking for advice. Sarah smiled, remembering her own journey from simply taking pretty pictures to documenting and defending community heritage. "Document everything," she wrote back. "Build connections. Remember that your strongest weapon is truth, clearly captured and carefully preserved. They can't bury what we bring to light." The afternoon sun painted golden light across the historic district. From her studio window, Sarah could see the restored Willow Creek flowing freely, children playing in the community gardens that had replaced Vale's planned parking structures, neighbors chatting on restored Victorian porches. "We didn't just save buildings," Diana observed, watching the scene. "We proved something important, that communities can stand up to corporate power. That preservation isn't just about the past, it's about protecting our future." Sarah picked up her camera, preparing to document another day in their ongoing story. Vale had thought they were just fighting one photographer, one property owner. They never understood they were attacking something far stronger, a community's connection to its heritage, its determination to preserve what mattered, its power when united. "Sometimes," Sarah told her gathered neighbors, "the most important things we preserve aren't visible in photographs. They're in the moments we stand together, the heritage we protect, the communities we build." The setting sun caught the stained glass of her studio windows, creating patterns across her gallery wall. Each image told part of their story, not just of resistance, but of renewal, not just of preservation, but of growth. Vale Development had tried to erase their history, Instead, they had made it stronger, clearer, more precious. They had taught a community the power of standing together, the importance of documentation, and the strength found in preserving what matters most. Sarah raised her camera one final time, capturing the evening light across the historic district. In the end, Vale had been right about one thing. Change was inevitable, but the most important changes weren't in skylines or property values. They were in the hearts of people who had learned to fight for their heritage, in the bonds between neighbors who had stood together, and in the knowledge that some things were worth preserving, no matter the cost. The historic district stood proud, its character intact, its community stronger than ever. And Sarah Mitchell, the photographer who had helped save it, knew that the most valuable pictures weren't just the ones that captured moments. They were the ones that preserved truth, protected heritage, and proved that sometimes the best stories were written not in development plans, but in the courage of people who refused to let their history be buried. That was worth more than any photograph could show. But Sarah would keep documenting it anyway, one precious moment at a time. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.